Old Tom Gray here. Made me a table for my old Rockwell Porta Band. It fits on a bench top, it can fit in a vise, or it can fit on my weld table. It's made out of just steel scraps I had laying around and a little bit of hardware. I'll show you how I made it. Here's how I do this today. I simply clamp the little shoe in my Wilton vise and then hand finagle whatever I'm cutting across the blade. So in order to put a bigger table on here, the first thing I need to do is increase the size of this shoe so I can still use it to when I'm using the saw freehand by itself and provide a bolting surface for the larger table. So I gotta also spread the load out because right now this shoe is only held on with these 2/4 20 bolts onto this casting right here. So I want to spread the load out somehow and try to pick up a couple points out here so I'm not putting all the stress on these two little pieces of the die casting. To put the larger shoe on, I found this in the collection. It's a hunk of a bracket. Looks like it's 3/16. It's from a piece of office furniture that I garbage picked. I think if I mount it like so, it'll work. And to spread the load out, I'll add a little J-nut over here, pop a hole through there, and I'll be able to screw this down, and that'll give me more surface to attach the larger table to and still leave me a shoe that I can use when I'm using the saw freehand. To measure the angle between the blade and the casting surface, I just clamped this little piece of hardware store bracket to the flat part of this casting, and I'll just take my angle gauge and size up the angle, which looks like about that. I don't think that's quite 45, but it doesn't matter. Okay, now I want to take advantage of some of these bolt holes. So now I'll project the line that will be the outside of the new shoe and the new mounting bolt hole at that angle. And it'll look something like that. Now that this is cut, I need a gusset that replaces this shoe that comes off of these two bolts and will attach to the bottom of this. So I'll remove that and size up something. I found this thing in the scrap bin. So I drilled it's almost perfectly sized. So I drilled 2 holes in it to match the mounting holes for the ball bearings. And I'll trim it up later, but I'll sculpt the gusset out of that, and that looks like a saw cut, like somebody missed. So I'll clean that up after the fact. But let's mount this up to size things up. I cut this down to size a little bit. Now to locate it, I scribed a line halfway deep into the flange of this casting such that it corresponds to the maximum reach of this J-nut. So the J-nut can go on there and grab the bolt coming through the top of the table or shoe, and then to space it or to locate that hole on that scribe line, I'm going to set a piece of 3/4 plywood on there. And then I'm going to set my new shoe on that. And I'm going to eyeball it straight with the machine surface on the bottom of the motor housing, and such that it's right tight against the blade. And then I'm going to drop the scribe down, and I should be able to mark right there. So I just got to pop a little hole in there. I generally don't like drilling holes in tools, especially in old casting like this, but here goes. I stuck a piece of scrap sheet metal in there to protect the tire so my drill doesn't puncture the tire. First I'm going to knock off all this powder coating. Got her back clamped up in my vise with the new gusset bolted in where the old one used to be. Here's the new larger enhanced shoe, and to install that I'm going to take a spacer, which is a 5/8 with a 1/4 inch clearance hole in it, and a number 10 flathead machine screw, and I'm going to snug that down. To align the table, so I installed the spacer underneath, and now I'm going to make sure the table is square to the blade. So there's my Stirrup Machinist square. Might be hard to see, but there's a little bit of daylight between the bottom of the square and the blade, but she's touching at the top. So now I'm just going to torque this down to where she's going to live. Perfect. So when that's snug, the new shoe is dead on square to the surface, to the blade. So the blade and the shoe are square. Looking up from underneath the table, here you can see the gusset, and over here you can see the spacer, and then just below it you can see the J-nut, and it's just clearing the tire. I'm going to say there's maybe 5/10 thousandths in there, and the screw is not sticking through into the tire, so we're looking good. Now the next step is to tack the gusset to the table. I'm going to tack the gusset to the table, or to the shoe. If you got one of the new saws with all the fancy electronics, do not do this. You'll fry every transistor in the thing, every circuit board in the thing. But this old rude dude here is just a simple induction motor. It's unplugged, so the ground is completely isolated from all the electrics, so it's no big deal. Now I'm going to finish weld the gusset and the spacer. This is a mock-up of the vise mount method. So here's the new shoe clamped to a piece of 3-inch angle iron, 12 inches long. So now what I got to add is table extensions to come off of here and off of here, in this area and this area, around the blade, and then a bracket for the bench mount pad that goes over here. Let me see what I got for that. All right, another piece of office furniture bracketry that I garbage picked. And this happens to be 3/16 thick, which is the same thickness as my angle. So I'm going to use that for the table extensions. So my table is going to be that wide, and I'm going to add probably another 3 inches of depth on here. So for the bench extension, I've got another piece of the office furniture junk, except this is 1/4 inch thick. So that'll be the pad that goes on the bench, roughly where it's sitting on the bench right now. And then a couple of hardware store brackets that I can use for gusseting this bracket to the angle, the big 3-inch angle. So this will basically sit something like that with the angle attached to it, and that'll be the pad that we can clamp down to the bench or screw down to the, to a weld table or whatever. I think I'll do the table extensions first. You can see through the maze of clamps here. Here's the right-hand table extension. Here's the left-hand table extension. I knocked all the mill scale and powder coat off of the steel, so I'm going to tack these in place now. And I left a slot for the blade so you can mount it. And we've got blade clearance. So that's working fine. Once again, through the maze of clamps, there it is tacked up. That hole, maybe that hole, and that hole are hitting the shoe. So I'm going to finish weld this and then drill and probably tap those holes so that we can get this all screwed together in place and not have to rely on clamps to do the rest of the setup. So I'm going to finish weld and grind all this now. Here's the table all welded up and grinded up. Now I need to add the clamping pad. So I got it rigged in here such that I can get a clamp between the table and the clamping pad. That way, this clamp, flip it over, when it's clamping to a bench, it has room for its fixed jaw to grab onto the clamping plate, and for the top to clear the bottom of the table like this. So the top of this fits under here, so I get a good solid grip on it with a C-clamp. So I'm going to cut this piece of reject office furniture down to size and figure out how I'm going to tack it in, weld it in. This kind of goofy setup is for the table pad. So I knocked the corner off the plate. You can probably just see it, and that allows me to get, looking straight down, the edge of this bracket aligned to the edge of a table or bench, so I can clamp right to the edge and not worry about hitting the lower wheel. And then this gusset here, I'm just using a piece of 1.5 inch scrap, but it just wants to be, it wants 1.5 inches to allow the big clamp to get under here like that. So I'm going to knock the powder coat off of this, at least where I'm going to weld it, and then tack it to the angle. Maybe on this side it's a little easier to see, but here's the pad that'll clamp to a table. Here's a piece of 1.5 inches to space it out, and then here's where it's going to join to the angle. So again, I'll knock the powder coat off of this and then tack this together and try it out. There it is, de-powder coated and clamped in place. Okay, now I can tack it. Everything looks good. Made a little gusset out of a piece of scrap off of the offcut. Now I'm going to put that in here and tack that in place. Here's the table assembly, tack welded. So now I'm going to clamp it up and finish weld all in here and in here. There's the underside of it, all welded, and I ground the welds, but I'm probably not going to dress them up too much more than that. And let this thing cool off. It's still pretty warm from the welding and grinding. So I'm going to let it cool off, and then we'll do an assembly and one more bracket to make, and then we'll be good. Propped up on the welding table. You're looking at the bottom, so obviously here's the saw. This is the bottom of the shoe, and you can see the point where the shoe almost touches the inner radius of the angle. So this is easy to put together. I want to put a little teeny weeny shelf in here so that it's easy, so I can one-hand the assembly. I can swing the saw in here, get it engaged on the little shelf, and then start that screw. So I can one-hand the assembly. So I found this little piece of scrap. I'm just going to weld it in there just like a little shelf in some orientation, maybe like that. And all it's for there is just to engage the shoe while we're assembling the saw to the table. And then I want to reinforce this end of the table and get some more meat to the casting here, so it's not just holding on the 3 bolts that it's currently holding on. I want to add a 4th one. So there's a hole here. Maybe I'll add another one. And I found this bracket, another Simpson bracket, that'll mount right like so, and I can attach it to the blade housing with a couple of J-nuts and a couple of screws, and pick up that screw hole. So I'm going to get this cut down and knock the galvanizing off of it. Little change of plans here. I'm going to use this little piece for a gusset right here. Obviously this is going to be a removable bracket, so I'll chop it off. And then my little shelf helper starter bracket, I'm going to use this little trapezoidal piece that I found. And I'll tack that in there. So get that tacked up, that cut off, sanded and grinded. Time for the full trim test fit up. So we'll start with vise mount first. And she goes into the vise. Along comes the saw. We guide it down our blade slot. Rest the nose of the shoe, or the toe of the shoe, if you will, on the shelf. And start the fasteners. Install the side bracket. Got her plugged into a plug strip, so to lock the trigger on, I'm just going to use a cheap plastic clamp. Let's give her a test. First, just a scrap of kind of junky maple. Switching it on low speed for test number 2. This piece of condi with a, I don't know what I was doing there, but a bolt welded into it. That's a success. Now let's try the bench corner configuration. We'll saw this burned up piece of Simpson strong tie. That's a success. Now we'll do the weld table setup. Alright, now I'm going to take it apart and hopefully for the last time and grind it and sand it and clean it all up, knock the rough edges off of it, get rid of the rest of this powder coat. Well, there it is, all done, ready to put in service. This thing's going to come in handy. I already got some projects lined up where I know I'm going to need it. So I'm going to leave this one here, and it's on to the next project. I'll see you there and then.